Howdy, folks. Great to see everybody. And I'm so pleased to have Erica Thompson from the Columbus Dispatch with us today. Erica is going to be talking, as you can see on the screen, about diversity in the newsroom with tips for expanding coverage and supporting reporters of color. This training comes out of our investment in the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Symposium that investigative reporters and editors put on earlier this year. Erica was a part of that, and I asked that everybody that went to it come back and share some ideas that inspired or that they feel really confident in sharing and supporting other colleagues on, and that's what Erica is here to do today. So I'll hand it over to you, and I know we're all looking forward to learning, so thank you.
Thank you so much, Mackenzie. Hi, everyone, and thank you for attending. As Mackenzie mentioned, I am from the Columbus Dispatch. I'm a business reporter, and I focus on race, gender, and the economy. And as he mentioned, I will be talking about diversity in the newsroom. And just waiting for my next slide. There we go. So I thought it was important to draw from my experiences and some of the great work the Columbus Dispatch has been doing recently around diversity. We're not perfect, but I've been encouraged by the steps that we have taken during the last year. With that said, I will discuss how to develop localized stories by paying attention to diverse audience reactions to major or national news, how to push for more diverse coverage in the newsroom, and how to support reporters of color. Seeking out the responses of diverse audiences to major news can help generate diverse localized stories. And it's important to remember that how audiences of color respond is often different than narratives we see in mainstream media or among all white groups. One easy way to do this is to pay attention to social media, whether it's your own timeline or going to the accounts of prominent activists or leaders of color. For example, after Kyle Rittenhouse was acquitted of homicide, I was seeing much of the same sentiment from Black folks on my timeline. For example, Scott Woods is a writer here in Columbus, and he has a weekly column with our sister publication, Columbus Alive. Although he is quoting from his article, many others were sharing the same thoughts. And I'll read what he wrote. He said, "I have schooled my body to be on alert for the police. I am used to them getting away with the taking of life for no reason. They're cops. What I've discovered is that I'm less prepared for the well-armed, random, self-deluded white person who doesn't realize how good they've got it." So I was happy to see that the Dispatch did a follow-up article centering the voices of Black leaders following the verdict. As you see here, Columbus NAACP leader fears for safety of Black community following Rittenhouse verdicts. If we wanted to pursue another article in this vein, we might look at research on people of color who were in similar situations as Rittenhouse and facing similar charges, but who may not have been acquitted, especially in Ohio, and see if the data shows a glaring discrepancy. There is public data on stand your ground laws disproportionately harming Black folks, which is another reason why Black people were concerned about the Rittenhouse verdicts. And when the Stand Your Ground law was passed in Ohio, there was an immediate fear among Black folks who expressed their concern in social media posts like this one. And I'll read it here. It says, "BIPOC Ohioans, don't forget that Stand Your Ground law hits this week in the state. This is the same law in Florida that made way for George Zimmerman to murder Trayvon Martin with impunity. Also, don't forget that this law was not meant to protect us. It was meant to be used against us. This is the same law in Florida that didn't protect Marissa Alexander, a Black woman, for shooting a warning shot at her abusive husband. Remain vigilant, protect yourself, but don't count on this law to protect you in the event you have to." So the Dispatch could have done a separate article on this reality for Black people, but I was happy to see that the writer included this issue within the main story and linked to some of the data. I also was pleasantly surprised to see that the Black community was centered in the photo that you see here on the left. And I think this is a great way to highlight diverse issues if you are unable to do another article in a short window of time. However, nothing should stop us from doing another article on this in the future. It wasn't difficult to find different perspectives on the tragic death of Gabby Petito. Pretty early on, we heard voices from communities of color about the lack of attention paid to missing people of color and the missing white woman syndrome. This is an important discussion that the media can continue to highlight while also reporting on more missing people of color as much as possible. Media outlets were able to do that with their opinion sections. And here's an example from USA Today. More than 710 Indigenous people vanished where Gabby Petito's body was found. Cry for them too. Around that time, the Columbus Dispatch reported on Sequoia, a missing trans woman of color. And then our opinion and community engagement editor, Amelia Robinson, wrote a thoughtful column. Missing Black Columbus trans woman deserves Gabby Petito attention, and so do others. At any given point, there are missing people of color from all neighborhoods and cities. Moving forward, I think media outlets should just commit to doing a certain number of these stories each year so that the work speaks for itself year round and not just when missing white woman syndrome is a topic of discussion again. This is also a great opportunity to take a look at the unique risks for trans women of color who are being killed at an alarming rate. We've been talking about doing stories on this at the Dispatch, so hopefully we'll make that a reality in the near future. Here in Columbus, the death of 16-year-old Ma'Khia Bryant made national news. She was shot 4 times by a Columbus police officer. She had a knife and was in the middle of a dispute with another female. On my timeline, I kept seeing posts from teachers and social workers about how they have de-escalated similar situations that did not result in the death of a young person. So here's an example, and I'll read from some of it. It says, as a former teacher, I've broken up plenty of girl fights in my time and took a light brush on the face when I got in between 2 girls in my classroom. I remember a girl going to the library to get a pair of scissors to stab another girl, and our dean tackled her as she was running down the hallway. No one was killed or hurt. Another time, a girl came to fight another girl at a park during our field day, and at some point, she had some type of sharp object in her hand. Anyway, nobody got hurt except when one of the girls started macing everyone. Anyway, we got the situation de-escalated. So I wasn't seeing this perspective from teachers and social workers in articles, so I decided to write one about that. And here it is, Ma'Khia Bryant death. Teachers, social workers discuss how they diffuse conflicts, avoid tragedies. I also think my colleagues at the Dispatch did a tremendous job of reporting on Ma'Khia's death in a nuanced, holistic way that honored her humanity. We immediately had a meeting to talk about how we should be reporting on it and divided up responsibilities. My colleagues interviewed her friends to talk about who she was. Because she was in a foster home, they looked at problems in the foster care system and how they especially impact Black girls. We also looked at the number of juveniles killed in Columbus by police and how that compared to nationwide statistics. One of the most impactful stories was done by Amelia Robinson for the opinion section. She put together a spread of love letters written to Black girls by Black women in the community. Ma'Khia's death reiterated the unique challenges that Black girls face and how they are not always portrayed positively in the media. Moving forward, I think media outlets can make a commitment to doing more stories highlighting Black girls in a positive way year-round. Now I'd like to share some other ways to push for more diverse coverage in the newsroom. At the Dispatch, I suggested a monthly diversity audit, which the editors graciously implemented. Each month, we devote one of our regular team meetings to analyzing our recent coverage. We ask ourselves 3 questions. First, what were our wins? This is an opportunity for reporters to call out what we did well, which also allows us to give our coworkers a positive shout out. Next, we ask, what were our missed opportunities or areas for improvement? We want to make sure that this is a positive discussion. We don't call specific people out or take an accusatory tone. It's as simple as saying, I'm glad we covered the Stand Your Ground law, but I think we have an opportunity to better highlight how this affects people of color. Or I've been hearing from leaders in the Latino community that they don't see themselves reflected in our newspaper. How can we improve on that? That conversation naturally leads into the third question, which is what specific diverse ideas can we work on in the next month or near future? For example, we could say Black History Month is right around the corner. Can we develop a strategy for doing Black focused stories across all of our beats? This also gives reporters an opportunity to share stories they are already working on and possibly get some advice. I am also looking forward to when we can do a more advanced data-driven audit of our coverage over longer periods of time. As for the other tips, I'm sure they've been included in other presentations, but it doesn't hurt to repeat. As reporters, we should be mindful of our sources. Are we tapping the same group of people for our stories? Are we including a diversity of race, gender, age, and neighborhood? For example, if we want to speak to small business owners about the impact of the pandemic, we should be sure to include a business owner of color. Don't be afraid to ask for help from other colleagues. Perhaps a reporter covering immigrant communities or race and gender could offer some contacts. Of course, we should be sure that we are developing our own contacts so we don't have to go to other reporters over and over again. It's also important to get another pair of eyes on stories that cover diverse issues, not just your editor. It could be another reporter or editor you trust. It also helps to discuss stories with people outside of the newsroom. Of course, you're not sharing your copy, but if you're reporting on a delicate issue in the LGBTQ community, it doesn't hurt to call someone in that community to talk through concerns. Finally, we have to speak up when a story or headline is problematic. This could be done privately with an editor. Again, we shouldn't be calling specific people out in group settings, but if we know that an article is going out and it may prove harmful to a community, it's important to say something. This can be done in a constructive way in a meeting. It's as easy as saying, can we talk through scenarios where this section of the article or this headline might not be well received? And now I want to take some time to plug our mobile newsroom. The Democrat and Chronicle in Rochester also did this, or I think is currently doing this, and they've been great in guiding us through our efforts. So we're on our second month of this, and basically we go to a different neighborhood each month, and we set up in the library, which is kind of the easiest space to pick, and it's central in the community. And we get to know the people, we get to know the organizations and the issues and find stories to report on and really make sure we're representing that community for that month and writing balanced stories, both positive and maybe areas for opportunity. And so far, it's been really great. As for me, I've been reaching out to the Black-owned businesses first to do some individual spotlights. And this neighborhood has a legacy of Black entrepreneurship, so I've been reporting on that history as well. And of course, like the mobile newsroom is another way to increase diverse coverage at the newspaper. So when it comes to supporting reporters of color, the first step is diversity, equity, and inclusion training in the newsroom. I think this should be mandatory and ongoing. For example, at the Dispatch, we have been having sessions with a local organization. I've voiced my opinion that this should continue, maybe once per quarter. Beyond that, I think editors should be mindful of the extra trauma reporters of color face when reporting on racism and ask if a mental health day is needed. Also, I think it's important to offer breaks from heavy stories. For example, an editor can assign a lighter story following a major report on racism. I've learned to ask for these things myself, but it helps when the editor is proactive. And really, I think we should talk more about like a general program about trauma for all reporters. I think that could be really useful. Also, reporters of color often feel isolated in predominantly white newsrooms. It's important to ensure they are being included in social outings hosted by other colleagues, or especially when a new reporter of color joins the newsroom, it's worth reaching out for a one-on-one coffee just to get to know them. Finally, like many other industries, people of color are not promoted at the same rate. Editors and managers should be proactive when it comes to talking to employees of color about career goals and paths to advancement. So those are just a few tips that I wanted to share based on my personal experience. thank you all so much for coming to my presentation, and let me know if you have any questions, comments, or like tips of your own that you can share.
Erica, this was just great. Thank you. You do have some questions, so I'll just feed them to you. How about?
Okay.
So there was some interest, and I kind of had a question myself about your. You called for a more data-driven analysis, content audit, source audit, and so I was wondering if you have a vision for how that can happen. And Lacey Beveridge has a question there where she's even put more specificity. And maybe I could ask Lacey, could you speak up and just so we can hear your voice and understand it in your words before Erica replies?
Okay. Yeah. Well, the first question was like, when you were talking about like the missing people, where do we find that kind of data? Because I have no idea where to even begin looking for stuff like that. And then the second question I had is about I've written a couple stories about like missing Black women, and when I see the alerts go out, it's usually not by police, but by like a Black Lives Matter group or things like that. And they're calling it like a Keisha alert. And I was wondering if you could speak about what a Keisha alert is and who Keisha I'm assuming is a real person.
Thank you for your question. That is actually news to me. I'm going to make a note for myself. I haven't heard of the Keisha alert. And like, again, that just shows, even though I'm a person of color, I don't like know about all of these things. So that's something I'd look into. But I think as far as covering this, it's a combination of what police can offer us, but then also, again, like you said, partnering with those local groups of color, because I think I first heard about Sequoia, the trans woman I mentioned, from an activist. So if we're in regular communication with those folks, I certainly think they'll be able to tell us a lot, unfortunately, about what's happening in those communities and people who are missing. And in terms of the question about the audit, hopefully, I'm hoping many of our newspapers do, we have a librarian, and she, I would really rely on her expertise to help us with this long-term audit. But I would imagine it's like maybe looking over the past year and seeing, who our sources were, who was on like the cover, the A1 section of the newspaper, how many people of color, how many women. Also, when I was talking about Ma'Khia Bryant and how we covered that, unfortunately, here in Columbus, we've had so many other young people killed by police. And I remember 13-year-old Tyree King from 2016. We did not do the same type of coverage on his death that we did on Ma'Khia. So I even think a comparison of those two situations would be useful. Like if we see how many stories did we write about Tyree King and what were they versus what we did with Ma'Khia, and that's like a positive thing to share. Like, look how much we've grown, and we can use this as a template moving forward.
Great. And my mistake there on, I was blending Lacey's question with mine, and they were both about data, but different kinds of data. So thanks for parsing that, Erica. Rachel Stassenberger in Iowa has a question about the mobile newsroom, and the Register, I know, is in the middle of a project to have its digital advisory group, which may be a way to sort of build the mobile newsroom. So Rachel, if you're still on, let's hear your question a little bit more.
Sure. I may have to drop. We've got severe weather. Essentially, one of the things we have been thinking about in terms of mobile newsrooms is how you get the word out, in part because our normal lines of communication, our websites, our newspaper, our newsletters aren't necessarily reaching our communities of color. And so I just wanted to hear more about how you attracted the people, invited the people to come. Are there Instagram tricks and tips? Is it Black Twitter? Is it Facebook groups? Because, as you know, traditionally our newsrooms are not speaking to these communities. And so using our traditional lines of communication to invite our non-readers is problematic. So I'd love to hear how you did it.
Yeah, and it's a great question, and it's definitely a work in progress for us. I think we can be doing more to get the word out, but partnering with community organizations is where we normally start. Including the library. So I was actually going to ask my editor this, like, is the library putting our mobile newsroom in their newsletters? We also printed out flyers for them to pass out, but then there are a lot of Black-led organizations in the community that I just called up and told them what we were doing, like the community center or area commissions or civic associations, or like I said, I've been talking to Black business owners. So I just called them and told them about it. So it's really like a combination of boots on the ground and then just maybe getting organizations to put it in their newsletters. And then we have been trying to do consistent hashtags on social media, like hashtag mobile newsroom and the name of the community that we're in. So it's been like trial and error and a work in progress, but those are some of the tips we've been doing.
And that's really great to hear about some of that one-on-one communication you're having, because it is part of the relationship building that you're doing through your mobile newsroom, which is you've got another reason to call these organizations. And in this case, you're not asking information from them, you're inviting them to something, you're giving them something. And so it's really smart to sort of undergird the relationships you're building. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
As these questions have been coming in and things have been happening in the chat, I just want to direct everybody's attention to some different resources that we have that are relevant. So for example, we have a landing page with kind of primary materials on mobile newsrooms. These mostly come from Rochester that Erica mentioned before. So check out that link. We heard a conversation there about the trauma that journalists are exposed to. We have a whole category of resources for journalists undergoing trauma and how to get help and how to help others who you see experiencing that. We heard about the particular case of the trans woman that Erica covered, and we don't do a good enough job as an industry or as a company or as individual newsrooms in giving trans people the dignity and respect and accuracy in our reporting that we should. So there's a resource there to help you in your newsroom be better at that. And then this latest conversation about that Rachel sparked there about, sort of our newsrooms fail to communicate, fail to build sources in a wider range of our communities and have failed for a very long time. And we have some making up and work to do. We had a session as part of this series a month ago called Conducting a Source Audit and Building a Database of Local Sources. That was Alfonso Galvan from South Dakota and Jana Hayes from Oklahoma did that. So I'd encourage you to check that out. Are there other questions or thoughts we want to raise while we have Erica here? If not, Erica, I know just because this conversation ends doesn't mean you disappear. So are you willing to, if anybody wants to reach out to you directly to give advice or answer a question here or there?
Yeah, please do. Yeah, email me. I'm also on social media too. So I would absolutely love that, because I think so often, like, Gannett is such a big company, and sometimes I feel disconnected from like all of our sister publications and even those resources you mentioned, Mackenzie. Like, sometimes I don't seek those out or know about them. So I think our individual newsrooms can get better at telling us what resources are available. So anyway, certainly please reach out to me. I'd love to meet you.
Eric, it's Rachel again. This was really helpful. I would be happy to talk to you or others as you're gathering the data. As Mackenzie knows, I'm a bit of a data geek as well as a news director. And sort of through the table stakes program came up with a spreadsheet on fault lines and a spreadsheet on trust to make these really concrete. And so I'd love to hear how other newsrooms are working with that.
Excellent. Yeah, Rachel, I'd love that.
Yeah, and Rachel, in addition to us needing to update your business card to have Data Geek on there, I think it's coming time here in the new year where the Register Table Stakes team leads conversation for the company about your groundbreaking composite trust measurement system, which is like, it sounds like a mouthful, but it's actually it's a really brilliant insight that that Rachel and 4 or 5 of her other colleagues have come up with, so that we can understand the level of trust, or the trust gap that our neighbors have with us and with our coverage, and understand how we can improve it and whether we're improving it over time. So that's a preview of a coming attraction, Rachel, if you're willing to help with that.
I'll make another slide deck for you, Mackenzie.
Oh, the earlier one will do. So so good. All right. Well, Erica, thanks so much for your preparation, for taking the time, and for helping us with this. And I'll have a recording available here shortly for everybody. We had a great turnout here, but there were some people who weren't able to get here, and you're more than welcome to share the recording with anybody inside the company or out. So it'll be coming to your inboxes here soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to attend the symposium and to do this as well. Happy holidays, everyone.